Yep. All right. Well, welcome everyone to Board Development Committee meeting. Maybe since we have a new person, maybe we take a few moments to go ahead and introduce ourselves and get to know each other before we dive right into it. I will start. Hi, I'm Jason. I'm the chair of the Board Development Committee and the treasurer for Volunteer Tennessee. I've been on for 2 or 3 terms. I lose track of time at some point, but it's I also run an AmeriCorps program in Knoxville, been involved in national service since 2006, and it's really rewarding to be a part of the state's efforts to expand volunteerism and service. Let's see. Would it be useful for me to call on people just to kind of go through it? Yeah. Hey, Amy, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, Rebecca, welcome. I'm the commission chair this year. And I also am the director of volunteer and community engagement at Cheekwood. And I've been on since 2014. It's a little while.
Thank you.
Would you like to go, Yvonne?
Hey, Rebecca, welcome to our committee. I have been a member of the board since fall of 23. I filled the remaining term of a previous commissioner. I work for Greenlight Fund, which is a nonprofit philanthropy. I'm the strategic support manager. Welcome.
Thank you.
Tracy, are you there and able to introduce yourself?
Yes, I will try. Hi, I'm Tracy Van de Vey. I have been on the board for a number of years, and I am also in Knoxville, and I work for the CAC, the same organization that Jason works for, but I work in the Office on Aging department.
Do we know who the phone number is?
The phone number that starts with 14 and ends with 15 is Rebecca Henderson.
Hi, Rebecca.
My landline on speakerphone, and then also on the computer. I was having some computer issues earlier this morning, and I just thought, oh, I'm going to cover all of my bases here.
Gotcha. Would you like to introduce yourself, Rebecca?
Certainly, thank you. Well, I am, of course, Rebecca Henderson. I'm from Johnson City, where I live, and have lived almost all of my life here. I graduated from the University of Tennessee in Knoxville and lived in Knoxville for several years after graduation, but I consider Johnson City as my hometown, and I have always lived, so to speak. I have worked in nonprofits almost all of my professional career in some capacity or other, whether it's paid or unpaid. I've been board chair of various committees, commissions. I've been on over 40 different nonprofit boards of directors. I love nonprofit work. I especially love strategic planning, bylaws, that type of thing, those geeky types of things, so to speak. And people, what do you do in your spare time? Well, my spare time is pretty much doing volunteer work. That's me in a nutshell.
Fantastic. Welcome, Rebecca. Neelam, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. I am the Volunteer Tennessee staff, working as compliance director for almost 20 years. So I'm the supporting person here for the Board Development Committee. So again, welcome, everyone. Jim, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, hi, Jim Snell, Volunteer Tennessee Executive Director.
And Lucian, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Lucian Geis. I'm the State Department of Finance and Administration General Counsel. I'm not on the board, but I'm here to answer any legal questions you may have about the bylaws or whatever else might pop up, and I'm happy to answer questions for you.
Yeah, so a little bit of context, Rebecca. So we are in the midst of a bylaw revision. We're also taking a look on a different subcommittee at the executive order and looking to do a revision on that. We're trying to clean up some of the language and add some clarity in terms of just updating some basic things, but also clarifying some of the relationship between Volunteer Tennessee as a commission and its relationship with the state of Tennessee. So I'm glad that you mentioned that you love working on bylaws because we've been doing a bit of that lately. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. So without further ado, Jim, do you are you able to bring up the bylaws and where we left off?
Yeah, sure. This is, I've already renamed it for today's date, but this is the version that the committee left off with at its, I believe it was March 26th was the date of the meeting, sometime around then. Jason, I don't know if you, do you want to go directly back to where we started off, or how do you want to handle it? Because we were, I think the committee was pretty much at the end and there were two things. One was the dissolution thing that Lucian provided some guidance on, and the other was the executive director thing. But I think the committee, and Yvonne's shaking her head, I think the committee had pretty much worked through everything else. But I don't know if for Rebecca's benefit, if you want me to scroll through the rest of it, how would you like me to work this document?
So ideally, I would definitely love to get through the rest of it today so that we can, kind of submit it and move on from it. Because I think the state had a sense of like how long this process would be, and I just don't want to extend it any longer. So would it be possible for you to maybe just give like a high level of some of the like bigger things outside of like general language alignment and stuff like that we've been doing?
Sure. So kind of high level, a lot of the changes are corrections to language that maybe were out of date or didn't really align very well with the executive order. And so those are some of the edits, including some of the ones that are on the page now. So I think all of this is that, sorry, I'm going to scroll back up. One of the key edits, and I'm having trouble finding it, and I'm sorry, I'm giving everybody probably vertigo by scrolling back and forth. But one of the key edits was to change the size of the commission from a set 25 to a range of 19 to 25. And so that's in here somewhere. And so it gives the governor flexibility to, as long as the commission has at least 19 people, we're good. If the governor wants to appoint additional people beyond that, the governor would have that ability with, and that's a change in the executive order that would be reflected in the bylaws, but the executive order has to come first. Most of this is kind of corresponding the current executive order with the bylaws. Let's see. Then there's some stuff that was in here to make sure that the commission's bylaws are compliant with open meetings requirements, because there was some stuff in here that had been in essentially since the beginning of the commission that didn't totally correspond to the relatively recent changes to the Open Meetings Act that have been made within the past 3 to 4 years. And then a change that the commission had previously made about proxies that also didn't correspond. So there were some edits related to that. Then there was adding back in the audit committee which the commission on a previous edit had taken out, but based on some statutory requirements of agencies that have authority to hire employees, they're required to have an audit committee. So that got added back in. And then there's been a long-standing, well, that's not a standing committee, but a committee that's been operating for quite some time called the Foundations of Service Committee. And it actually wasn't in the bylaws, so that adds. Then there's executive director stuff that the committee needs to come back to. And then that takes us to the end. And then this final dissolution article was the one that the committee had kind of gotten to this point last time and discussed. And Lucian went and did some research and provided and essentially recommended that the committee take this out. If I remember correctly, Lucian, that's kind of your general recommendation.
That's right, Jim. I think that that language is typically used for nonprofit organizations when they dissolve. What happens to the assets? And Volunteer Tennessee is a creature of state government. It would only dissolve if there's another executive order saying so, or a statute or some kind causes it to cease to exist. And if that happens, that statute would spell out what happens to any asset you may have. So I think it makes sense to just delete that if that's okay.
Sure. And just I to be honest, I don't know the exact historical context behind this article. It's been in here, I think from the very beginning of the commission. My guess is that when they drafted up the bylaws, they kind of took a template set of bylaws from, a nonprofit organization and just carried this over from that template. And that's probably how it got in here.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you have like a friends group, don't you? Some nonprofit that's authorized that you may have that kind of language in that bylaws or official charter.
Yeah, and I believe it does have a dissolution, but the companion nonprofit came along much later. It actually didn't start until about maybe 10 years ago or so. So the commission itself, this version of the bylaws, again, has, as far as I can tell, this article has been in here from the very beginning. And so it predates the companion 501c nonprofit. But I think the bottom line is Lucian's recommendation is to delete this article. I don't know if anybody, Jason, if you want to lead a discussion on that or check consensus or how you want to go about that.
I mean, it seems like the impression of legal counsel and just kind of overall is that this kind of is 501c3 language. The commission isn't in 501c3 specifically, so this wouldn't apply to it. So, I mean, it seems to me like this would be fine to be removed. Does anybody have any opposition to that or want to discuss it?
Oops, sorry. For some reason, it's not tracking changes. So let me turn on the track changes.
I will add that I think the way it's worded, if you left it in, it wouldn't hurt, but it wouldn't be applicable because governing federal or state law would apply in that first sentence. So it would never trigger any of the extra dissolution stuff.
Okay. So Jason, that takes us to the very end. There was the part about the executive director that I think, if I remember correctly, the committee wanted to kind of put on pause and kind of continue. So I don't know how you want to handle going back to that section.
So for the sake of moving forward, this seemed to be the sticking point. I think it's worth getting through it. I think there's a variety of potential conversations that could happen surrounding things like are we attached to F&A or another department or other things? But I think for the purposes of now and just making sure we line up with the present circumstances, we should probably resolve this so that it's agreeable with finance and administration. And so that we can kind of like put it on the books. And then if we're going to have other conversations around like the structure of the commission or things like that, we can put those into meetings and we can discuss it over a period of time. I just worry that not resolving some portion of this, because I'm also on the subcommittee for the executive order, and there seems to be some similar type hangups, and I just worry that we get into this kind of like endless loop where it doesn't resolve. So maybe since this is kind of the last item, let's, if you could remind me, I apologize. I have the advice that Lucian sent over, and we've looked at this a few times. Could you remind the group, Jim, kind of what the pivot points or the questions are at hand so that we can work through them?
Yeah, sure. And I think this edit here, the changing the shall to may, I think the committee did that in the last discussion as kind of when it first got into this, but and
okay.
Yeah.
So that reminds me, the shall may is so I think the question is whether the executive is appointed by the board or hired by the state. Yeah, if you could just go through that.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sure. Well, especially for Rebecca, since she is new to the commission. So,
Yes.
and so just as as kind of a baseline, as far as I can tell, this article on the executive director has been in the commission's bylaws from the very beginning of the commission. Let's see, I don't think the removal part was added in the last round of revisions. But otherwise, all the other language, I'm pretty sure, had been in there from the very beginning of the commission. So, and the, without getting too into details, the executive order, which created the commission, does have a line that says that the commission has the authority to employ additional staff. There's also a line that says that the Department of Finance and Administration shall provide administrative and staff support for the commission. Lucian can clarify if he feels like he wants to, can clarify the Finance and Administration viewpoint on that. But for quite some time, the understanding of the commission and the staff was that the staff were employed by the commission, but within the last year, there's a different interpretation that, based on the way the executive order is written, that the staff are actually employed by F&A directly and provide that under that clause it says administrative and staff support that is in the executive order that directs F&A to provide that, as opposed to being employed under the separate clause that gives the commission the authority to employ other staff. So where we are right now is the understanding, based on the current interpretation, is that all of the Volunteer Tennessee staff are employed by Finance and Administration, not by the commission, and that the commission itself is not currently utilizing that clause that gives it authority to employ other staff. And Lucian, feel free to correct me if that is not kind of a correct interpretation of where we are right now.
That's
Didn't you
fundamentally
have
where
some
we are.
input from the Department of Human Resources or whatever? Didn't you have some?
Yeah. Well, so that was kind of, that's more related to the executive order revisions that are going on at the same time. So based on my conversations with the Deputy Commissioner Leslie Farmer at the Department of Human Resources, in terms of how the commission, if it wanted to make sure that it was actually itself employing staff, what it would need to do in order to do that and make it clear in the executive order. She pointed out a few things. One is that there would need to be a headcount budgeting authority within the state budget, which is already there because their Volunteer Tennessee appears in the state budget as a separate line item with all of the staff in that line item. And then the other thing, she gave me some suggestions to look at other agencies that are in a similar situation, that they're administratively attached to some other agency, and look at language on how those agencies were essentially given authority, autonomous authority over what they do. And so I looked at that and provided that set of information to the ad hoc committee. And she gave me 3 or 4 different commissions to look, or 3 or 4 different agencies to look at. So, but again, that's all on the executive order side of things. And the executive order would have to come first. Those changes would have to come first before then anything in the bylaws would have any standing, I think. And again, Lucian, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong about that. But so, and I think that's why on the last round, the committee changed from shall to may to leave that so it's not saying that the commission shall, it may employ. So if a future situation allows it to on its own employ an executive director, that the bylaws wouldn't necessarily have to be revised again. Although it's very likely that the bylaws will have to be revised again if the executive order is revised.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think in a previous conversation, if we were to, as the commission, directly hire the executive director, and then the other staff were so it would be like commission employee versus state employee. There seemed to be some, and I don't know if that was if we became a freestanding nonprofit, then you couldn't supervise or manage state. You know what I'm saying?
Well. So just to clarify, the executive order creates the commission. So it gives the legal authority for the commission itself to operate. It also does have that clause that gives the commission the authority to employ additional staff. And the executive order committee is working on clarifying that to make it clearer that the staff are actually staff of the commission. All of the staff would continue to be state employees. There's never been any question at all about whether or not we are state employees. We are state employees. We always have been state employees. The question is who's actually employing. Is F&A employing or is the commission employing? But there would be no change in status of being a state employee unless the commission wanted to form separately as a 501c3 and go that route. And there are 4, maybe 5 state commissions around the country that are freestanding 501c3s that have gone through. There's a federal legislative requirement to be able to be what's called an alternative commission administrative authority, I think is the term. But that, as far as I know, that has not been on the table at all as a discussion to have the commission spin off as a separate 501c3. Now, there have been some discussions about, one, clarifying the executive order to make it clear that the commission itself has authority to hire its employees as state employees. There has also been a little bit of conversation about the possibility of having Volunteer Tennessee be created in state statute as an independent state entity, like, for example, the Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth, or the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. There's several non-departmental level agencies that are independent of. They're not administratively attached to something else. They're independent, but they're still state agencies. So there has been some discussion about that as well. But just again to clarify, I don't think there's been any discussion or that there's any will to discuss potentially spinning the commission off as a separate 501c3.
Okay. So with this and with the language being may, Lucian, do you feel like leaving this section in as is, do you think it creates unnecessary confusion? Or do you think it's language that could be used as a placeholder in the future? I mean, functionally, if like, you know, this is describing a process where there's an executive director search committee. You know, this is a process we've gone through before. Would this process be applicable if, like, let's say Jim left and we were looking to hire the next executive director? What would that be a process where we would put together a committee and work with finance and administration on that process, or what would that look like?
I'm sure that would be fine. There's a couple provisions in there that are just practically challenging, and it gets down to the commission's authority to hire and fire state employees. And I don't think right now you have that authority. So you're welcome to leave it in there as a placeholder, and I can work with you. I think Jim is right that to change from the current situation, you would need something different in your authorizing document, whether that's an updated executive order or a state statute, or if you spin out into a nonprofit, whatever that source document is, would need to give you authority that you don't currently have to hire directly and fire directly. Right now, you are administratively attached to FNA, and we provide those employee resources, sign the checks on behalf of the state for Jim and his team, rather than the commission paying them. But that is, he's correct, authorized under your statute that within budgetary limits, you have the authority to hire employees. But we operationalized through the support structure with FNA serving as the employer and Jim and his team as state employees supporting your efforts directly. So.
Well, and just to clarify, we may want to, as far as I know, either Deputy Commissioner Farmer or someone from her team is going to be at the meeting at July 19th. Okay. But which I think there's, you know, that could be helpful in a lot of, not just for the bylaws, but also the executive order. But when I spoke to her back a few weeks ago, she did say that under the current state statute that specifies what an appointing authority is, that the current executive order already gives it already makes the commission an appointing authority because of that clause that says it can hire additional staff. So, okay. And again, I think the clarification that's needed is that clause that says FNA, Finance and Administration, shall provide administrative and staff support is what's creating the confusion, because there's staff there and then there's staff in that other clause. And the ad hoc committee, one of the things they've done is they've struck that and staff part, and they haven't finished. I mean, they're still working on potential changes, but then they're also going to be looking at some of that other language that Deputy Commissioner Farmer recommended from other agencies that are administratively attached, and essentially kind of in the same situation. They're attached to a department, but okay. their language uses something, and I'm not this is not going to be exactly what it says, but it's something, I'm paraphrasing because I don't have it right in front of me, but it says something along the lines of like, X agency shall operate as an autonomous agency, except for the purposes of administration through the Department of the Environment and Conservation, something like that. Again, that's a very, very broad paraphrase because that's not exactly what it says, but it does have very specific language that says the entity is autonomous. It's just administratively attached. So anyway, that's the kind of recommendation that she made in the revision to the executive order that would clarify some of the confusion.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah. So I guess we're kind of still at that question of, does the May kind of take care of some of the current ambiguity of where we are right now? Well, I guess where we are right now with the commission not having or not appointing its own staff, does the May kind of give enough wiggle room to leave this section in here, or does the entire section need to be deleted and then the subsequent sections renumbered?
Well, I think that the commission may recommend to appoint, but as it is now, it doesn't have the authority to directly hire and fire. So I agree that may is better than shall, but I don't, again, you're welcome to leave it as a placeholder. You just need to work through the details of that authority in the executive order rewrite.
Okay. And so you had mentioned that the section 3 talks about removal. And so like spaces like that would be kind of in conflict with, like, we voted to remove the executive director, but as it stands, we technically couldn't do that because the executive director is an employee of FNA or the state. Yeah.
I would think if two-thirds of the majority of voting members voted to remove the executive director, that FNA would facilitate a termination, or at least talk to you about what needs to happen to terminate somebody.
Okay. Well, exactly. We want to present the voting majority in attendance at regular meeting called for that purpose. Should we add language just for the sake of clarity that adds that, like, in removal, it's the two, but maybe some kind of statement that, the commission will work in partnership with finance and administration to facilitate that process, or something that just makes that clear?
Sure, that'd be good. And again, that's may be removed. It's not shall be removed. So.
Oh yeah, right, yeah. Well, and that was the language from the last edit. So
okay. Yeah,
that the may be removed.
Jim, so it doesn't sound like fundamentally keeping it there is the biggest problem. It sounds like this document is kind of waiting on executive order revision. Also, we struck the disillusion piece at the bottom. This piece is using the terminology of may instead of shall. It seems like there's an understanding that with these processes we would work with finance and administration, both in regards to hiring and firing anybody. So I mean, is it, do we just hold this and call this like done until the executive order gets to its point, and then we do the final tweaks on the bylaws to align with what we're like once the executive order is implemented?
Yeah, and Yvonne has her hand up. So,
Hey Jim, the other committee that's working with the official order, what time frame are they looking at? Are they talking about 2024, or are we talking about 2025, 2026?
Well, they're moving as quickly as they can, but their work can only be a recommendation. So I think generally the process, and there's not a specific timeline associated with it, is that committee would make recommendations for revisions to the current version of the executive order that was originally put in place in 1994 and then revised in 2006. And so they're looking at making suggested changes to all of that. Then the intent from that committee, as far as I recall and as far as I understand, would that they would then send it to Lucian and the Finance and Administration General Counsel to take a look and make sure that they hadn't put in language that conflicted with some sort of state statute, you know, that it was, that the language itself was okay and compliant and didn't conflict with anything. Then it would have to then go to the governor's office, and the governor's legal team would do another pass, I'm assuming, and then they would make a determination on whether or not they actually wanted the governor to sign it. And the part that involves the governor's office is completely out of our control, and there's no way I can really even guesstimate what a timeline for that might be. So I think the general hope for that committee is that they can get at least the proposed revisions done before the end of this year, which I think they're pretty close. In fact, they had a meeting last week, and they're pretty far along in the executive order, but they also they got caught up on this a similar section in the executive order, because they're like, oh well, we don't have authority to do that, and I'm like, well, but that's what this executive order would do. It would give you the authority to do this. So that we kind of went around and around a little bit in discussions with that committee about kind of a similar wording. But they're getting pretty close.
So Lucian, using the May that we agreed on at the last meeting, from a legal standpoint, this section is in line with where we are today with the official order, correct?
Not exactly. I mean, you use may in some of it, but not, you use shall in other parts. In section 2 talks about shall be appointed by the executive search committee.
If
you still have to have a state government in that mix.
So if we change the shells to may and make a notation about working with FNA, then would it be aligned?
Yes, I think we could work with that.
Okay.
But how does the group feel about that while we're still waiting to get to whatever the new revised order may be, because it might not be accepted?
I agree with that modification, changing to May's, and maybe in the beginning, Volunteer Tennessee may appoint a full-time executive director. Maybe it could be appoint and remove a full-time executive director who shall serve at the pleasure of the commission in partnership or relationship with finance administration, and just put it in the front piece just to make it really clear that the subsequent text is in partnership with finance and administration throughout.
Okay, I like that.
One potential wrinkle with that, though, is that so assuming that everything works perfectly and the executive order gets revised, then the commission would at that point have to go back and revise its bylaws again, and who knows how long that would take. I mean, hopefully the commission could do that fairly quickly, but the bylaws in some ways restrict you And in general, you want to try and have your bylaws be specific enough to handle most situations, but not so specific that they restrict you from doing things. And I see Tracy has her hand up, so I'll stop.
Just a question. Are we proposing that these changes are submitted and that the board is going to vote on them on the July 19th date?
No, because the requirement for the bylaws is that they be the revision requirements or the amendments is that they go to the full commission 30 days prior to the next regular meeting. And so we're already past that point for the July meeting, but they could, if the committee finalizes everything today, I mean, you could still present it to the full commission on the 19th and say, we're going to bring this up for a vote at the October business meeting.
Okay. Is that sort of the general plan? Is to try to vote on these now because the executive order is sort of on a open-ended deadline.
Yeah, well, so my understanding, so and also just for context, because we've got a new person with us, the commission went through a fairly lengthy process last year of revising its bylaws, specifically to add that section about removal, because that wasn't in the previous version, and it caused problems with a chair who tried to remove the executive director without the authority of the rest of the commission. And the commission specifically wanted to prevent that from happening. Everybody at the time said, revise your bylaws because that's what you have authority to do. The commission can revise its bylaws. You can't dictate how the executive order gets revised because that's in the governor's office. But the bylaws are within the commission's control. So the commission went through that process to revise it. Then we got the different legal interpretation that actually and that's this comment over here from Mary Ferrara, that the commission actually didn't have that authority to hire and fire the executive director, that other clause that said the finance and administration shall provide administrative and staff support was how the staff were employed, not the other section. And so then the commission had to go back and start working on another revision to try and bring the current set of bylaws under kind of alignment with that slightly different interpretation of who was employing the staff. And just as a little history, my understanding when I was first hired as a staff member was that I was being hired by the commission. And then when I was first hired as executive director in 2007, the commission went through this process and had a search committee, and my understanding was that the commission hired me. And then when they rehired me in 2022, was it? Whenever it was the recent time when they rehired me, it was again my understanding that the commission, because they did the search committee, that the commission had rehired me. But that whole process, I think, brought up some additional scrutiny on the executive order and the bylaws, and that's the interpretation that we're under right now, that the commission actually doesn't have that authority, or the commission isn't exercising that authority that's in that separate clause to employ staff. So that's how we kind of got to where we are right now. But again, there was no, unfortunately, there was no timeline set out specifically for this committee, but we certainly felt urgency from various sectors to revise the bylaws quickly, which is what the commission did in 2023. And it did revise its bylaws to add in, again, kind of the primary reason was to add the removal section. They did that. And then when the change in interpretation happened, again, the commission felt like it was under pressure to move quickly to revise its bylaws again to address some of these things that had been brought up by the change in interpretation. But there was never any timeline set by the commission or by this committee in terms of specifically when it wanted to have the final version completed and before the full commission for review and approval.
There's a hand raised.
Yeah, it's Tracy.
Mhm.
I don't know if Tracy, was that your
Sorry.
previous question?
Sorry, yeah, that was my previous, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
Trying-
okay.
Okay, sorry.
So,
Well, I guess if we're going to present this, we can only present this based on what we have exactly now, not based on what we think the future's going to hold, correct? Or what discussion in another committee is happening. I mean,
right,
you know,
yes, yeah,
so,
right.
I mean, I guess, presenting it at July the 19th and then being ready for a vote. I mean, the commission can vote it down if they want to, correct?
Well, again, just to clarify, it wouldn't be presented for a vote at July 19th meeting. I mean, the committee can present it and say, hey, here are the here's what we've done. The committee intends to present this for a vote at the October business meeting, but there wouldn't be any action actually happening at the July 19th meeting.
Right.
But yes,
right.
the bottom line is yes, the commission can either approve it or not approve it based on what the full commission wants to do.
Okay. So at the July meeting, would there be commission discussion about what has happened so far with the bylaws, or would it just be just presented?
I think that's a question for Amy.
For what it's worth, we tend to do updates by committees. So at the very least, it could be part of a discussion related to updates on the progress on committees. So board development could talk about, we went through this. These were some of the more contentious talking points. We could, if today we put in language that said something like Volunteer Tennessee may appoint or remove a full-time executive director who shall serve at the pleasure of the commission in partnership with finance administration, or something that's just kind of balances out where we're at the moment. That would at least be something that we could then people could ask, and we could get kind of a bigger sense of how the commission feels about that. Because I mean, I think at this moment, I think where it kind of rubs is that there's not really a clear language on the dynamic with finance and administration and how that connects. And I think maybe by putting it in that first piece, it'll make it so that, we have this removal process on the board end. We're not going to go to FNA unless we have this 2/3 majority vote, and then we'll work with FNA to remove them. So again, no longer having random board chair or some other person comes to FNA and is like, hey, because our bylaws will still have that, but it'll be known maybe more implicitly that finance and administration should be kind of wrapped into the process if something like that happened.
Yeah, Amy, you're muted.
There are a lot of little changes, I mean, that we're just doing that's, shoring up some of the text currently. But that was a primary point of contention and an issue that I think people would be interested in. I mean, I don't think, Jason, to your point, we need to go through all of the changes and go through the whole document. But I think some of the key points that, the commission was aware of that caused problems and that everybody had to address, kind of letting people know the progress on that and where we're at on the status of that, I think. I think,
And just to-
with
to
your,
everyone-
when you do your report, I mean, we have a lot to get into the whole, I mean, I don't know what, I think questions after kind of a general statement about the work that's being done, Jason, is probably the best way to go about that.
So Amy, to everyone's point, and this will be the first time that I'm going through this with the commission, so this might already be in place. Do we have the little bylaws form where it says current wording, recommended wording, and rationale? And then you could just hit those high points and not go through the, we changed the and the and all of the little things that we did. So you guys will have to educate me. This will be the first time we're presenting it to the board with me being a commissioner. So I don't know if we just give them that breakdown that just hits those highlights.
So, go ahead.
No, go ahead,
Well, I
Jason.
was just going to say, we can, and I'm going to throw this back to Jim. I mean, since we aren't voting on it, I don't know about sending it out in advance of the meeting. If we can really do that, because we're not certain for some of the text and meaning of the text. I don't know, Jim, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it would be fine to send it out to the full commission before the July 19th meeting with all of the edits that the committee is recommending up to this point. I don't think there's any harm in that. They just wouldn't vote on it. To Yvonne's point, what we have done what we did last year is the entire commission got this track change version. And then we kind of quickly went through the changes, and the ones that were like not necessarily in this document, but the previous one where we were correcting commas and putting those kind of grammatical changes. We just kind of said we made some grammatical changes and spent a little bit more time on some of the other key changes and just kind of presented this document, or not this one, but the previous one, with the track changes so that they could see kind of what's on the screen right now, what has been changed from the previous version, and talk about why those things. We could potentially put something together like what you're talking about as a summary, but I think the full commission needs to see the entire document in order to be able to vote on it. And again, the vote won't happen until later, but I don't think there's any harm to providing the full document in July.
Well, I was just didn't know how much time you wanted to devote to it, and if we could focus on the key issues.
Yeah, well, yeah, for sure. I think it would probably make sense to focus on the key changes that were made, that the committees discussed. To kind of go back to the point, and I know we're getting really close on time, but it seems like you're really close to wrapping this up. So again, my general concern is for the commission tying its hands with language that is going to be applicable under the current situation, but not applicable under the potential new situation. And so if changing some of the shalls to may is enough to give that wiggle room, because obviously the commission can't do things that it's not authorized to do. So if changing some of these shalls to mays is enough of a wiggle room without then putting in like language of working with F&A, because if the situation changes under the executive order, but your bylaws still say that that's what you have to do, just again, a hypothetical scenario, right after the executive order is changed, the entire commission decides it wants to get rid of the executive director. If you change the language, you would have to then work with finance and administration to do that, as opposed to doing it directly under your bylaws. And again, that's a hypothetical. Hopefully that won't happen, but that's the kind of thing where you're potentially tying your hands with language that you might not necessarily need in order to get the current situation also addressed?
What I will say is that executive orders and governor's appointments and things like that, I've seen them sit for a year plus in the governor's office. So it might be something that could be a year, could be a year or more. I think we committed to finance and administration that we would try to look at this and clean it up and line it up as best as we could. This is something we have more tangible control over in terms of making a good faith effort to line this up with how FNA understands the relationship, just to add clarity. I don't know if saying that at the pleasure of the commission and in partnership with finance and administration, I don't know that actually ties our hands, because I mean ultimately we would work in collaboration with finance and administration, and if there was an administrative change of some sort, we would likely have to work in collaboration with finance and administration either way. And if the executive order does change, we'll probably have to go back and tweak this thing again anyways. So, I mean, I think just for the spirit of getting this on the books as clean as we can, also demonstrating good faith with our partnership with finance and administration. Just something, something about pleasure in collaboration with the Department of Finance and Administration. Yeah, just so that it's kind of clear and implicit throughout that we have these processes as a commission. We have when we're looking for our executive director, this is how we're going to do it. If we're looking to release the executive director, this is going to be the commission's process, but understanding based on that first statement that it's going to be in collaboration with the states, which is a good idea just to make sure we're not getting sideways with any kind of state requirement.
Okay, so I added that in collaboration with the Department of Finance and Administration on that first. Some of these shalls, like the executive director shall be qualified, that's a shall that you probably want to leave. But then the appointment, changing that to may. The search committee, again, that I don't know if that's one you want to change to may, because I mean, if you're going to form a search committee, then either it has 7 members or it has some other number.
Yeah. I mean, if that's the number that we're looking at, I think it's fine if that's kind of the committee's process. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that language was added by Mary in the review of the previous version. So I'm going to, for the purposes of what gets sent to the commission, take that part out. Okay, so then we get to this duties part, which has some shalls, at least. Yeah, there's some shalls in here.
Shall have authority to designate the duties and powers of the commission staff and delegate special powers and duties to the commission staff. Be inconsistent with laws. Yeah, as long as it's not inconsistent with laws, these bylaws or action of the members, provide adequate supervision. Ensure the commission conforms to the requirements of authorized regulatory agency and authorities and oversees compliance with the laws, carry out all policies and procedures as established by the commission, serve as liaison between the commission and the governor, and in general have all powers perform other in the chief executive officer, the powers, duties shall include acting as a representative of the commission to the public, as well as the government. The commission will be authorized to execute and shall execute documents, contracts and other instruments on behalf of the commission, except where restricted by law. I feel like a lot of the duties, it has language that talks about laws and where otherwise restricted by laws. Lucian, do you think those kind of caveats with those specific duties make that section sufficient?
I think that the chair of the commission might have certain authority pursuant to the executive order. And I don't know it well enough to know if there's any disconnect that you'd be putting the executive director in that role, if that makes sense.
I see.
Jim may have a better hand on it. I assume y'all wrote that
Yeah,
with that in mind.
yeah. Well, I believe. Let's see. Let me go back. Sorry. Let me scroll back up to the section that talks about the chair, because I think this this I think is pretty well mirrors what's in the executive order. Preside over meetings. Let's see.
Like as you're giving away money, whatever that format is, who signs the approval? Is that the
That's
chair
not
decision or is
specified.
that executive director?
Yeah, that's not specified in the executive order.
Okay.
That's not specified in the chair's authorities, and it's not specified in here either in the bylaws. But it is it is spelled out in this duties section of the executive director, and that's where it's been.
As long as the commission is okay giving that authority, it seems okay. So.
Sorry.
This language for the executive director, that's kind of been what's been in here historically, right?
Yeah, as far as I can tell, that section has been in there from the very beginning. Again, really the only change to this section is the removal part. And then, well, and this little preamble was added in the last revision. So I think those were the only two changes really that were made to the executive director section in that last round of revisions. And again, as far as I can tell, to be honest, I don't have a copy of the very first set of bylaws. I can only go back to, a couple revisions, the revision that happened in before the one that happened last year, and then the one right to that before that. But as far as I can tell, this section has been in there from the very beginning, or at least I can't find when it was added if it was not part of the very first version.
I think functionally we're trying to keep things very similar for how Jim's role functions at the moment. I think we're also trying to clarify the relationship with finance and administration and making sure that they are included in processes related to hiring, firing, things that HR would otherwise be involved with. So my disposition would be with the inclusion of in collaboration with the Department of Finance and Administration, leaving the duties as they have been, that this might be a good draft to take to maybe discuss our thinking on this with the broader board at our next convening, and then see if we can work towards adoption at the earliest date.
Sure. And the other step, I mean, I know Lucian's been participating in these calls, but the other step would be between now and the October would be to send it back to him to let him just kind of take a closer look.
Yeah, absolutely.
In case we missed anything, and then present if there are any additional edits that need to be made based on that review, then that final version would be what goes to the commission in October. But I think if you all are happy with those changes, that's it.
And if we're going to vote in October, the final version would have to go to the commission on what date? September?
Yeah, so let me pull up my calendar so that I give you the exact date. So the business meeting is on October 11th. So I'm not going to do the math to figure out exactly 30 days, but let's say September the 10th, which would mean that we need it back from Lucian's office sometime before if there are any additional changes, this committee would need to review those additional changes and talk about that, and then that final version would need to be ready I would say no later than September 10th.
Okay.
So, I mean, I think we've got time, but if you all are happy with this version, Lucian, I'll go ahead and email it to you today. And that gives your office plenty of time to look at it. If we could, how long do you think it would take for you to kind of go back through and take another swipe at this?
I don't think it'll take that long, but it might take me a while to get to it. So
Okay.
I'll work within your deadline. So
Sure. Well, again, I think if you could have, let's see, we're at the very beginning of July. If you could have any changes or edits for this committee ready, would a month be enough time, or do you need a month and a half?
I'll work on a month, and if I get close, I might let you know I need more time.
Sure.
But I'll try to turn it over by the end of the month. Sure.
Okay. Yeah. So if by August the 1st we have the committee has additional comments or edits or changes from you, then that gives this committee time to schedule another meeting, because we also have to go through the public notice when the committee schedules a meeting. So we need to post at least a week in advance. So anyway, there's some timing stuff for the committee to be able to meet that we would need to do. But that would give this committee enough time to do that, and then should be well in advance of that September 10th.
I might also suggest that you reach out to the governor's office and just talk about your rewrite of the executive order to get a big feedback from them about their interest in helping you if they see any problems, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I will. I spoke to the governor's chief of staff back months ago about that, and he suggested that they might be open to it. But I take your point. It would be good to go back to them and say, look, the commission's working on it. We hope to have the commission, I think we'll have something before the end of this calendar year. Would the governor be open to it? Yeah, I can certainly do that. Okay. So, Jason, I think that's it. I apologize we went a little bit over, but I think the committee has gotten its work done on this issue.
I know. We can start talking about that October retreat, maybe in the July get together.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Jason, I don't have anything else from my end.
Well, awesome. Thank you everyone for being here. We've really looked at these issues closely. I think this draft represents a good balance that offers some additional peace of mind and protections intentionally for the executive director role, but I think it also acknowledges the relationship to finance and administration, which is an important part of how we operate now. And so I'm optimistic that this can put some measures in place that clarify the relationship and add some protections for Jim. And I look forward to seeing everyone in July to chat about this a little bit more and talk about our retreat in October.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.